Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Truth for Life. Today we are going to be looking at the topic, what are thoughts? I'm Dr. Mark Sandoval, and it's my pleasure to journey with you in a journey that is going to lead us to freedom in every area of our life. Right now, we're building foundational aspects associated with that. And speaking of foundations, it's important for us to have a good foundation. It's important to have a good foundation. If you don't have a good foundation, I don't care how well you build on top of it, things are not going to function well, as you can see in this case of a sinkhole that developed under somebody's house. Now, in building a foundation, we need to recognize that things function by law, and function is governed by law, and every function that is governed by laws that are unchangeable. And therefore, function itself is unchangeable. That doesn't mean that you can't dysfunction, but function is defined by unchangeable laws, and so function is what function is. And well, that's actually a good thing. It's a good thing that we have that. Imagine what it would be like if every once in a while gravity reversed itself, and now up was down and down was up, and you fell up instead of falling down, or sometimes you fell sideways instead of down. Well, that would be a bit traumatic, and I think most of us would be dead if that happened. And what would happen if every once in a while the sun's temperature went up significantly, or it went down significantly? It would make it very challenging to live. It would be very challenging to live. And what would it be like if the state of water changed randomly from liquid to solid, or from liquid to gas? Well, that would be a bit problematic because we would just crystallize, or we would vaporize, or something. It would be very problematic. And what if the world simply operated chaotically by chance? Well, thankfully, we don't live in a world like that. Thankfully, we have a world where nothing happens by chance, where everything has a cause, and everything functions consistently. And when we understand how things function, then we can predict how things will happen. Right? So we can make predictions because there is a consistency of function. And so consistency and predictability are very basic aspects of function. They're very basic aspects of life, of comfort and security and everything that we need. And indeed, there would be no science if there was no consistency and predictability. So, consistency and predictability are necessary, and consistency and predictability are based upon law. It is law or natural laws that determine that consistency and that predictability. And again, as we talked about last time and the time before, and we will continue to talk about, we are going back to the fundamental law. And the fundamental law is that nothing exists or functions from itself, and nothing exists or functions for itself. In other words, everything takes and everything gives. That's how it's created to function. And so this is the law of life. And the law of life means it is a description that tells us that everything functions like a channel, like a hose. And there's an entrance on one side and an exit on the other side. There is taking on the one side, and then there is giving on the other side. There is cause at the entrance, and there is effect at the exit. And every channel produces nothing of its own. All of the power, materials, resources, everything that it uses comes from somewhere outside of itself. Yes, it takes it in, and yes, it uses it. And it has it while it's in the process of taking and giving, and it uses it in that process, but it keeps nothing for itself. It's eventually going to pass everything along. Right? And that's how everything in nature functions. It functions by taking and giving. And while everything takes to give, it's also important for us to recognize that everything takes from one place and gives at another place. Nothing takes and gives at the same place. Nothing. Now, here's an interesting picture that you can see in the description, and the picture is actually of a waterfall being blown back up to its source and then going to be coming back down again, because it's in an area where there's so much wind flow that the wind will actually pick the water and pick the waterfall up and blow it up, back up into the pool that it was coming from in the first place. It's quite interesting. But there is an external force that's acting upon in that particular process and throwing the water back where it goes, but still it's nothing is giving where it takes from and nothing takes where it gives to. You think of yourself. You take food in one place, well, you're going to give food in another place. You take water in one place, but you're going to give water in another place, and so on, right? So it's unidirectional. And like a river takes water upstream, and it's going to give water downstream. And a wire is going to take electricity in one side and pass it along to the other. Yes, it's reversible. You can take the wire and turn it around, and now this side is the taking side, and that's the giving side, but it's still always going to be taking on one side and giving on another. And you have a hose and so on. It can take on one side and give on the other side. And while everything in nature functions as a channel, you also have multiple channels, so that one channel takes and gives, and the other channel takes from that and gives, and another channel takes from that and gives, and eventually everything comes around in a circuit. So everything functions in a circuit. And indeed, we recognize that in electricity. You have no electrical function unless there's a circuit. We see that even in the hydrological system in nature. Everything functions in a circuit. You have the ocean, and then you have the evaporation, and then you have it in the clouds, and then you have it raining and snowing and whatever on the land, and then you have it with rivers and everything going down to lakes and aquifers and eventually returning back to the ocean and then cycling back around. And even biological systems operate in circuits. You see that? Even the nervous system, it has information that's going and information that's coming back. And in the circulatory system, you've got blood flow that's going and then blood flow that's coming back, and it's all in a circuit. So everything functions in a circuit, but has individual channels that it works through. And there must be an order for every function. Every function must have an order, and the order of function never changes. And when the order is correct, then the system is going to function the way that it's supposed to. But when the order is not correct, now you're going to end up with dysfunction. Right? End up with dysfunction. Truth. There's a lot of controversy in regards to truth and whatever, and you have your truth and I have my truth and others have their truth. But in reality, truth is information that puts things in the correct order. And when they're in the correct order, they function. Error is information that puts things in a different order so that it doesn't work. So you can look at or test truth and error by how it functions or how it doesn't. Now, there are natural laws, of course, like gravity. We're very familiar with gravity. And gravity is what it is. It's absolute. It doesn't change. But our understanding may change about gravity, but gravity itself doesn't change. There's the Newtonian idea of gravity, where you have almost like a magnetic attraction between two bodies based upon the amount of mass that those different bodies have. And so one person would have a gravitational effect on another person. It just happens to be so small, it doesn't attract you to each other. The Earth is very big, and so it attracts you to it, and you go down. Well, then Einstein came along, and Einstein said, well, no, it's not necessarily an attraction between two things. It's just that mass warps space. And so when space gets warped, as you can see in the picture, it's like a bowling ball on a net, and it causes the net to come down. And then something that's close to that is likely to go towards that thing. And so the larger the mass that is, the more the force that there is. Anyways, so however you understand it, it is what it is, regardless of what you think about it. Thermodynamics, same thing. It's absolute. It is what it is. Our understanding about thermodynamics might change, but thermodynamics itself doesn't change. And cause and effect, it is what it is. It's absolute. And what we understand about it, it can change, but cause and effect does not change. So everything, again, that functions is governed by law, and all laws that govern function are unchangeable. So that means that we can experiment, and we can predict things, and that's good. You fly in an airplane. I flew here a number of days ago, and I was in an airplane, and there is an airplane because there's predictability. There are laws that govern that function. You can explore space because there are laws, predictable laws that you can use and experiment with, and then be able to design and construct things to go in that direction. Submarines, batteries, robots, and so on. All of these are possible because there are laws that govern function, and the laws are unchangeable. And every person has the same basic needs. Everybody has the same basic needs. You and I, we have the same basic needs. We need chemicals. We need oxygen. We need water. We need nutrients, right? We need these various different things. And we need temperature, or we need warmth, right? We need pressure. There's a certain pressure, environmental pressure, that we need in order to live by. And you need what you need because you are what you are, right? You need what you need because you are what you are. And different things have different needs. Okay. And that doesn't change. Now, you cannot change what you need, therefore you cannot change what you are. Or put the other way, you cannot change what you are, therefore you cannot change what you need. And everything that you need comes from outside of you and must be brought inside of you in order for you to live. And if it remains close to you, but it doesn't get inside, like this woman, she's not going to live by pouring water over her. She can only live by drinking the water, bringing it in and being a part of her. So if the oxygen remains at your nose, you die. It must come in order for you to live. If the water remains at your lips, you die. It must come in order for you to live. And everything you need must be brought in by yourself. It must be brought in by yourself. So if you need oxygen, you must breathe. If you need water, you must drink. And if you need food, you must eat. And the law, the fundamental law of take and to give, again, you must take it, you use it, and then you give it. Right? And cause comes at the beginning of the channel, and effect comes at the end of the channel. Okay? And that law of cause and effect, again, every effect has a cause. Every cause produces an effect. And if the effect is present, that means the cause is still present. And if the cause is removed, then the effect must go away or begin to go away. And if the cause is good, the effect is going to be good. And if the cause is bad, the effect is going to be bad, because the effect will always show whether the cause is right or not. So you can determine if the cause is good by examining the effect. And so if it's a good cause, it's going to lead to function. And if it's a bad cause, it's going to lead to dysfunction. So again, we talked about the mind as a part of a mechanism of control in the body. And the mind, of course, you have the electrical impulses that begin in the cortex. Those electrical impulses sent to the center part of the brain, the limbic system. The fibers cross. They go down through the brainstem and the spinal cord to the different parts of the body in order to control the functions that are happening in the body. And yes, there's a receiving part of that as well, where the information is sent back to the mind to be able to evaluate what's going on and then to be able to respond to it. And it's in the cortex where we have the electrical activity that begins, and this is where thought begins, right? Electricity and thought are associated with each other in the brain. If you don't have any electricity, well, you didn't have any thoughts. And if you didn't have any thoughts, you wouldn't have any electricity. And that electrical activity is sent down via the nerves to the center part of the brain. And there in the limbic system, there's the production of chemicals, neurotransmitters. And when those neurotransmitters, those chemicals are released, then that is picked up by other neurons that send signals back up to the cortex. And there you receive the information, and now you think about it. Right? And so the emotions and the feelings are the result of chemicals. Emotions and feelings are the result of chemicals. So you can manipulate how somebody feels by using chemistry. You can manipulate how somebody feels by giving them drugs, by giving them chemicals, by giving them medications, by giving them herbs, by giving them whatever. There are certain types of chemicals that will make people feel a certain type of way. But what you cannot do is give somebody a chemical and cause them to think a particular way. You can't inject somebody with a chemical and all of a sudden they will be loving. You can't inject somebody with a chemical and all of a sudden they will be honest. You can't inject somebody with a chemical and all of a sudden they will be generous, or so on. You can make them feel differently, and often we are accustomed to being slaves to our feelings. And so if you change how somebody feels, often they will think differently. But that's just because we have become accustomed to thinking according to how we feel, rather than being free to think in a certain way regardless of how we feel. So in the cortex, that's where we're going to have thought. That's going to be, reason and judgment and intellect and forethought and these other types of things. And in the limbic system is where you're going to have your feelings, your emotions, and your automatic responses and so on. That's going to be happening there. Now, about thoughts. Thinking is what we do the most. You do more thinking than you do breathing. You do more thinking than you do eating. You do more thinking than you do drinking, and so on. Thinking is what we do the most. And we're always thinking. But the question is, what are thoughts? What are thoughts? We ought to chew on that one for a little bit. Where do thoughts come from? Where do they come from? Where do they start? Wherever you find thoughts beginning, that is where the human being will begin its function. Right? This will begin where the humans function. And a question is, what do thoughts do? Right? What do thoughts do? Well, everything you do is an effect of your thoughts. And so thoughts do everything in you. Now, that doesn't mean that thoughts aren't, you've got chemistry. We know that. You've got chemistry. But the function is driven by the thoughts. Right? The function is driven by the thoughts. So, a question is, can the brain think? Right? Another thought, another thing to consider. Well, the brain really is composed of chemistry. It's made of protons and neutrons and electrons. It has various different molecules. And those molecules are in various different arrangements. Yes, the arrangements are different than in some of the other cells in the body, but the brain is made up of cells just like every other part of the body is. It's made up of chemistry. And the brain has chemical reactions. Right? Chemicals can react to something that's done to it. And the chemical reactions are dependent upon outside factors to function. So there has to be outside power, outside temperature, outside pressure, outside type of forces in order, and under the influence of those forces, then the chemicals will react. But chemicals can only function according to the laws that govern their function. Chemicals can absorb information. Chemicals can store information, like a hard drive on your computer, and chemicals can share information, and chemicals can do the same thing with energy. Energy can pass through matter and be contained in matter and then transmitted by matter and so on, like a computer hardware. But how many thoughts can the brain itself think? Well, chemical elements, if we look at here's a periodic table of elements, chemical elements cannot feel anything. Chemical elements cannot choose. Chemical elements cannot make decisions, cannot destroy themselves. They cannot have consciousness. Chemical elements cannot have cognitive or thinking abilities. Chemicals cannot have morals. Chemicals cannot realize something and then like it or not like it. And chemicals cannot organize themselves. They can't regulate themselves. They cannot act for themselves. They can only react to what is being done to them. And chemicals cannot look into the mirror and understand themselves and know why things are the way that they are. These things are all impossible for chemicals. And yet humans, we are not marionette dolls. Humans can do all of the things that were described that chemicals cannot do. And so a human not only reacts, because we can react, but humans also act. Right? So where does the ability to act come from if it doesn't come from chemistry? Something we need to ask. You ever get hungry? Yeah. You ever get thirsty? Yeah. Do you ever have fatigue or chills? Sometimes feeling suffocation? All right. So all of those are physical symptoms. Those are symptoms that shows that the body is lacking something. Your suffocation, you're lacking oxygen. Your chills, you're lacking warmth. You have fatigue, you're lacking food. You have thirst, you're lacking water. You have hunger, you're lacking food, and so on. So all of these signs are like the gas gauge on the vehicle. Or if you have an electric vehicle, the battery gauge. So it's the gauge that's on the vehicle to let you know how much is left and that you're running low. So the question is, to whom does the body signal its needs? Because the gas gauge in the car is not for the car. The gas gauge in the car is for the driver of the car. It's so that the driver can know the condition of the car so that the driver can do something for the car in relation to its condition. So the symptoms prove that the body cannot provide for its own needs. If the car could fuel itself, it wouldn't need to tell you what its fuel level was. If it was getting low, it could simply go and fuel itself up. The reason that there's a gauge that shows you whether it's getting low or whether it's medium or whether it's high or whatever is so that you, the driver of the vehicle, can supply the needs for the vehicle because the vehicle cannot supply its own needs. So the fact that we have hunger and these various different symptoms that show that we're lacking something, that proves to us there must be something that controls the body and something that supplies its needs. Just like there's a driver of a car, there must be a driver of the body And the body is signaling its levels to the driver so that the driver can supply the needs. Now, a physical living thing can only take in or absorb what it needs if what it needs is brought close to it. You can't absorb water if it stays out there. You can't absorb air if it stays out there. You can't absorb food if it stays out there. That has to be brought in so that it's close and it gets into, and now it can be close to, and now it can absorb. And physical things that are just physical cannot go searching for and finding out what they need so that they can take it in. So what is it in you and me that receives those signals of the symptoms? What is it that recognizes what is needed and then goes and uses the body to go search for what is needed and brings it close to the body so that it can absorb it and bring it in? Well, let me ask you this. I'm not answering the question right now. I'm just asking the questions. Do you need love? Well, we've already looked at that, and yes, we need love. Of course we do. So, what is the definition of a need? Well, it's different than a want. All right, so a need is something that you must have in order to live. It's not an option. It's a need. But it's also something that you yourself cannot produce. You can't produce it. Because if you could produce it, well, there'd be no need. If you could produce all the oxygen that you need in order to live by, well, there's no need to breathe. And if you could produce all the food that the energy that you need to live by, well, then there'd no need to eat, and so on. So a need is something that you must have to survive, but something which you cannot produce. So can you produce love? Well, the answer is no. No, you can't produce love. So is that just your problem, or is that everybody's problem? Yeah, it's everybody's problem. Right? It's everybody's problem. Now, let's consider something. Let's say that you are you introduce into a population a need. So there's some kind of genetic modification or something that happens, and now in a population you introduce a need for something for which there is no source. What's going to happen to that population? Well, it's clear it's going to die, right? It's going to die because there's no source for what it needs. Now, we have known, you can look back in Egyptian hieroglyphics, and you can look back in Sanskrit writings, and you can look back at whatever, and you can discover that we have needed love for at least, a few thousand years. But we're still here. But every human being needs love, but not a single human being can produce love. So that means that there must be a source for love. And it's not human. Okay? It's not human. Now, do you need a love that is full or that's incomplete? Do you need a love that is constant or intermittent? Do you need a love that is unselfish or selfish? Do you need a love that's personal or impersonal? Well, clearly, we all need a love that is full, constant, unselfish, and personal. That's the kind of love that we need. Do you need a respect? Do you need to be respected? Sure. And do you need to respect? You might not be sure about that, but you do. Now, do you need a respect that respects you partially or completely? Do you need a respect that respects you some of the time or all of the time? Do you need a respect that respects you so that it can get something from you or so that it can give something to you? And do you need a respect that respects you because it's forced to or because it wants to? Well, you need a respect that respects you completely, constantly, so that it can give to you because it wants to. That's the kind of respect you need. Do you need an understanding that understands you partially or completely? Do you need an understanding that understands you some of the time or all of the time? Do you need an understanding that understands you for yourself's sake or for its sake? Do you need an understanding that understands you because it has to or because it wants to? Well, again, you need an understanding that understands you completely, constantly, for your sake, because it wants to. Right? And everything that you need, every one of these needs, like love and respect and understanding and so on and so forth, all of those, you need those in order to function. You need those to be comfortable. There's a law that governs that, but there is no upper limit. You can never have too much love. You can never have too much understanding. You can never have too much respect. You can never have too much harmony. You can never have too much security. You can never have too much truth. You can never have too much of any of these types of needs that you need. There's no upper limit. There's a lower limit. And when you cross that lower limit, yeah, there's symptoms. There's disease, and there can even be death. That can be there. But there's no upper limit. Isn't that great? Isn't it? So we need oxygen, we need water, we need food, we need warmth. But we don't need suffocation. We don't need dehydration. We don't need starvation. We don't need freezing or burning. You need love. You need acceptance. You need respect. You need honor. You need truth. You need justice and mercy and compassion. But you do not need selfishness. You do not need rejection. You do not need disrespect. You do not need dishonor or lies or injustice or cruelty or indifference. Those are not your needs. Everything you need is good. And when it's supplied, it allows you to function properly. Everything you need is good. Isn't that good? Every need you have is good. You need freedom. You need security. You need understanding, loyalty, joy, harmony, mercy, justice, truth, responsibility, wisdom, recognition, appreciation, peace, and so on. All of those are things that you need. But there's no molecule and there's no combination of molecules. There is no physical structure that needs security, that needs loyalty, that needs peace, that needs any of these different things. All of these are spiritual needs. They're not physical needs. And spiritual needs reveal the presence of a spiritual entity. Spiritual needs reveal the presence of a spiritual entity. So you have the body, which includes the brain and, the rest of the nervous system and all of the body, the physical part of it that, that you can see. That's the chemical. It interacts with the physical world around you. It stores information. It sends information, and so on, up to the cortex. But you have a spirit. And the spirit is spiritual. And that spirit is the spiritual. It interacts with the spiritual world. It receives spiritual information. It imparts power to the body, and it controls the body's actions. And the combination of the body and the spirit is the soul. You are a soul. You are. And that's the union of the body and the spirit. And it's the soul, you, that is conscious, that thinks, reasons, evaluates, and understands, is aware, and so on. The spirit itself has no awareness, has no thinking, has no reasoning, has no evaluation. And the body itself has no awareness and consciousness and thinking and reasoning and so on and so forth. It's the combination when the two come together. And we might call that the mind. So you and I are kind of like a computer. It's a rough analogy, but it works. We're kind of like a computer, and a computer is made up of hardware and software. And when you have the hardware, if you only have hardware and you don't have software, nothing's going to work. If you have software and you don't have hardware, you got nothing. So the only way that you're going to have function is if you have the hardware and you have the software, and both are working together. It's the same thing when it comes to the body and the spirit. You have to have the spirit and you have to have the body, but you only have function when they come together. If you separate them, no function. But when you bring spirit and body together, the body doesn't stop being the body and the spirit doesn't stop being the spirit. And the body has certain aspects or components of your function, and the spirit has certain aspects or components of your function, but they only function when they're together. They only function when they're together. So we left off with a question a number of sessions ago. Was that last session? I can't remember. Anyways, but it was before we left the question, where does the power come from? Where does the spark come from that causes the electrical activity in the brain that then is used to control the different functions that happen in the body? Where does it come from? It comes from spiritual information. Because you and I are not just physical, we're spiritual. And the spirit feeds on information. The mind feeds on information. And yes, you have a spirit, and that spirit takes in the spiritual information. It makes it available to the brain. There in the cortex of the brain, when that spiritual information is made available to it, it generates electrical activity in the brain. That electrical activity is communicated via nerves and axons and so on to the various different parts of the body. It releases chemicals, and in releasing the chemicals, the cells take in the chemicals, and it controls and regulates the various different functions that happen in the body. Well, great. Now, truth is the information that you and I were created to function by. Because remember, truth puts things in the correct order so that they function. And so the mind was created to feed on or to eat on truth. And when the mind is feeding on or eating on truth, it can control what happens in the body the way that it's supposed to and lead to proper function. But what happens if the mind eats on error or lies? And that's what it's feeding on. Well, the spirit's going to take that in, make it available to the cortex. It's going to generate electrical activity, different kind of signal, that's then sent down the nerves to the different cells of the body, and the result is going to be dysfunction. So, what you are thinking, what you are feeding upon, the spiritual information that you're taking in and eating is going to have an impact directly on how the body functions. Okay. Not something that I was told in medical school, and something that I had to learn, outside of that. But it's a good thing for us to know. It's a good thing for us to consider, because now it enters into aspects of our lives that we hadn't thought of in relation to health. Like Michelle that I told you about before, that with her ovarian cancer. What was it that was going on that was leading to the cancer and would be associated with its growth or then its regression? Well, it was her thoughts. It was what was going on in her mind. When the cancer was growing and getting out of control, she was feeding on error. And when the cancer was going away, it's because she was feeding on the truth. And you could see the direct correlation of it happening in her life. Right? So you and I, again, we only have a need for what is good. We don't have a need for what is bad. We only have good needs, we don't have bad needs. And you can only pursue what you need And if what you need is good, you can only pursue what is good. You cannot pursue what's contrary to your needs or what is bad. Don't jump on me yet. Unless you're deceived into believing that you need it when you don't. You think you need Coca-Cola when you don't. You think you need tobacco when you don't. You think you need alcohol when you don't. You think you need something that will destroy you when, no, that's not what you need. You can only pursue that when you're deceived or deluded into believing that it is actually something that you need. And you can only go against your needs also when you're in a situation where you're forced to renounce a lesser need in order to hold on to or keep or to obtain a greater need. For example, let's say that that you are what's a scenario? All right, so you're in prison. In prison, you still have a need for liberty. You still have a need for freedom. And you are given the option to, or you take up the option to not eat in order to try to get out of prison. So you give up or you renounce a lesser need, food, for the sake of obtaining a greater need, freedom. Okay. So if you're in a situation where you cannot have both, you will give up the lesser need and you'll retain or hold on to the greater need. So when it comes to needs of the body versus needs of the spirit, when it comes to physical versus spiritual needs, we recognize that physical needs fulfill life, meaning physical needs are there for the purpose of maintaining life. Spiritual needs are there to fulfill purpose, for purpose. And if there is a conflict between the spiritual needs and the physical needs, who is it that wins? Who is it that wins? Well, here we have a picture. Who's in the picture? It's Mahatma Gandhi, right? And what is he doing? He's fasting. And why is he fasting? Well, he's fasting because there is some injustice going on. And for the sake of restoring justice, he will renounce his need for food so that he can obtain justice. So his spiritual need is greater than his physical need. And so he will put aside his physical need for his spiritual. There are people that have gone without food for particular causes and have eventually died. A proof that we are more than just matter, more than just chemistry, is that we can renounce the most important physical aspect, and that is life. We can put aside or put away life. The spiritual needs are always more important, and the spiritual needs always come before the physical needs. Yes, we can renounce life, and that can be in the form of suicide, that can be in the form of martyrdom, that can be in the form of some kind of sacrifice. Right? But we can never give up purpose on purpose. Right? We can never purposefully give up purpose, because purpose is what drives us. And everything that gives purpose is spiritual. It's not physical. There's nothing physical that gives purpose. It's what's spiritual that gives purpose. And every spiritual need you have, you need it completely. Partial will not work. Intermittent will not work. Forced or involuntary will not work. Ulterior motives will not work. You need it completely. You need it constantly. You need it willingly. And you need it selflessly. That's every need that you have. Every need. Now, can something that needs what you need be the source of what you need? Can another human being who needs what you need be the source of what you need? Can a tree be a source for another tree? Well, let's take one tree, and we're going to take its roots and pull the roots out of the ground, and we're going to put its roots in another tree. And we're going to take that second tree and we're going to uproot it and put its roots in a third tree. And we're going to take a third tree and we're going to uproot its roots and put its roots into a fourth tree. And we're going to continue doing that until we have every tree with its roots in another tree. What's going to happen to all of the trees? They're all going to die. Because it doesn't matter how many trees you have in this scenario, no tree can be a source for another tree. No single tree can be a source for another tree. No multiple trees can be a source for another tree. No tree in whatever number can be a source for another tree. And the same is true for people. No single person can be the source of what you need. No multiple people can be the source of what you need. If every person has their roots planted in other people, we're all going to die. We're all going to die. But there has to be, since again, we've been around for a few thousand years, and we know that we've needed the love, we've needed these spiritual needs, and we're still here. So that means there has to be a source. There has to be a source. So who or what is the source of the love and the respect and the understanding that is complete, constant, voluntary, and unselfish? Again, it cannot be another human being. It can't. It cannot be multiple other human beings. Cannot. It must be something that is itself full of love, full of respect, full of understanding, that constantly and voluntarily and unselfishly offers those things to you for your sake. That's what it must be. And by the law, since everything in nature takes in order to give, but takes something that is not its own and uses it and gives it on, and something takes of that which was not its own and uses it and gives it on, and everything functions in a circuit, every circuit must have a generator. It must have a pump. It must have something that is driving everything in the circuit. And so that law of taking to give that shows that we function as a channel also proves in and of itself that there must be a source, there must be a cause for the circuit, and the cause is separate from the circuit, or is the generator of the circuit. And I call that cause God. It's God. You can give whatever name you want to, but it's God. And God is exactly what you need. God is exactly what you're looking for. God is exactly everything of your spiritual needs. Every bit of it. And God is complete in and of himself. God himself has no needs. He's the source of everything. And he is independent, truly independent. He is not dependent upon anything or anyone. He is the source. Things come from him. And he has created it so that in his creation, he gives, and then his creation takes to give, and then takes to give, and then takes to give. and then takes to give and takes to give and takes to give, and each channel coming back around and finally coming back to the source. God, the great center of all, and through all creation, everything taking a give and working together as a circuit. That's how it works. Now, let's go back to the person. Let's go back to the mind, and let's evaluate the very different aspects of it. What is it that makes a dead person, as opposed to, 3 seconds after they die? What's the defining aspect of a dead person? It's the lack of electrical activity in the brain. When they're dead, there's no more electrical activity. Now, where does the electrical activity come from? Now, we talked about it already. We're just going to reiterate it and illustrate it a little bit differently. Right? Where does that electrical activity come from? It comes through the spirit. And so when the spirit is with the body, then you have a living person. You have the electrical activity that happens. And so what are the components of man? The components of man are a body, it's a spirit, and the combination of two is the soul. And when we're talking about the central nervous system, and we're also talking about the mind, right? The very prominent component of who you are, right? You have a mind. And in the living person, when the spirit and the brain are together, then you have the electrical activity. And if you separate the spirit from the body, then you don't have any electrical activity anymore, and you have a dead spirit and a dead body. No function for either. Now, but what are the different components of function? Because remember, when in a computer, when you bring the software and the hardware together, they still retain their individual components of function. So when you bring the spirit and the body together, what are their individual components of function? Well, the body, it signals its needs, to the spirit, to the mind, right? And it's received by the mind, it's evaluated by the mind, and then the mind makes a decision, and that decision is sent back to the body as a command. So the body, when it sends signals up to the mind, that is a request. And when the mind sends the signals back down to the body, that's a command. The body cannot not do what the mind says unless it just doesn't have the capacity to do so. It can't refuse to do so. But the mind can evaluate and can say no to signals that are sent from the body. So if you have hunger, the mind can say, no, not going to eat now. If you have thirst, the mind can say, no, not going to drink now. But if the mind says, drink now, the body can't say, no, not going to drink now. So hunger, thirst, fatigue, chill, suffocation, again, those are signals sent by the body to the spirit so that the spirit can look for and supply what the body needs so that the mind can do that process. And the body cannot supply its own needs. It's the mind or the spirit that makes the body move, that searches for the physical things that we need, that makes the body bring those things in, that causes you to breathe and drink and eat and so on, or stops the body from bringing those in, fasting and holding your breath and so on. And when it comes to reactions versus actions, the body always reacts, and it reacts to outside forces or information. Now you might say, well, a lot of it comes from inside, but the cells are going to react to what comes from outside of them, even though that might be what you might consider inside the body, but everything reacts, every physical thing reacts to what's outside of it. And the body is governed from outside of itself, and it can be forced. You can be put in handcuffs, you can be imprisoned, you can be forced to, this, that, or the other thing, and the body can be harmed from outside. It can be cut, it can be burned, it can be frozen, it can be smashed, and so on. But when it comes to the spirit is different. The spirit can react to outside forces and outside information. But the spirit also, and this is important, the spirit acts for itself. Right? It acts for itself. And the spirit governs itself from the inside. It is not governed from the outside. And the spirit can never be forced. It can only choose for itself. And the spirit cannot be harmed from outside of itself. It can only harm itself from the inside. So those are differences in function. Now, ultimately in destruction, in the final destruction, yes, the spirit can be destroyed. But when you consider its own function, no, it's not destroyed from the outside of itself. It destroys itself from the inside. Now, here's a question. Who can see? Who is it or what is it in you that can see? You might say, well, it's my eyes. Well, I know people that have eyes and they can't see. And you might say, well, the eyes aren't functional. No, there's people that have very functional eyes and they still can't see. Yes, you have eyes, and the eyes are in the body, and those signals are sent up to the cortex. You have an ear and 2 ears, and those ears send signals up to the cortex, and you have a nose, and that nose sends signals up to the cortex, and you have a tongue, and that tongue sends signals up to the cortex, and you have skin and sensory organs and so on, and you send those signals up to the cortex, and then that is received by the spirit or the mind, and it's evaluated, and it's then there in the spirit or in the mind that you see, that you hear, that you smell, that you taste, and that you feel. So all of those capacities, all of those functions are capacities of the mind. And if you didn't have the mind, or if you didn't have a spirit, you wouldn't be able to hear and smell and taste and and so on. You wouldn't, because those are spiritual capacities. And then, based upon that, you make a decision. And you decide, and what you decide is going to be sent back to the body, and the body will respond to the signal that's sent from the mind. So the body receives and transmits physical information, but it's the spirit that interprets it, that sees and hears and smells and tastes and feels, and then determines how you will respond. So without a spirit, there's no consciousness, there's no thoughts, no spiritual needs, no judgment, no morality, no responsibility, no spirituality or ideologies. There's no sensory perception, no education, no teaching, no learning. We would be pointless to be here right now if it wasn't for the mind or the spirit. There would be no voluntary bodily movements. Those are all evidences and proofs that we have a spirit. And the spirit and the body together make the soul, and you have a mind. And praise God that we do. And praise God that He is exactly what we need. So as we go on in the future, we're going to be looking more deeply into these things so that we can know how things are and how we can be free.